Artcast. We're back again with another great episode. And of course, we're getting towards the end of the year. We're rounding out 2020, thank God. I feel like, next year might be maybe as bad, but hopefully not as this year was. And again, I hope these episodes and this podcast in general are giving you something to focus on during these, unsure times. I know there's a lot going on in the world, but hopefully my little slice of the internet is keeping you guys happy as we move forward. This episode is probably unique in the sense that, we've typically talked to artists, either 2D or 3D in the games industry. And, I think as I've moved forward, we're moving on to our fourth year with the podcast. And, I'm starting to think about how to branch out, maybe, expand our thinking or the people we talk to. So I thought today was a great example and a great opportunity to bring in someone that was slightly different from the type of people we're used to talking to. So hopefully you get something out of today's talk. People who are, of this discipline, I think you'll find the episode really interesting. So if you guys can please help me welcome along today's guest, Mr. Darren Korb. Hey, Darren.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for being on the podcast. It's a great honor.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome, cool. So super quick, for people who don't know you, can you just throw out your name and your current job title?
Yeah, my name is Darren Korb, and I am the audio director at Supergiant Games. So I've worked on the audio for Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and now HADES most recently.
Yes, which is a very awesome game. Congrats on the 1.0.
Thank you very much.
And of course, shipping to Switch and stuff like that. It's a big achievement, especially during the pandemic. We were talking previously before the kind of the audio rolled, but I've been following you guys on the No Cut documentaries and the whole Developing Hell series. I think it's been really great to just peel back the curtain and have a look at how you guys exist. I think it's also awesome just in general how you guys have also came from such humble beginnings and still humble, but of course now you've left a bigger mark on the industry. And I think it's just great in general what you guys have done with the team. I think It's really awesome. So
thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah, you're more than welcome. So HADES, of course, now I think almost every time I'm on Twitch, there's always somebody just playing the absolute hell out of it, pun intended. But yeah, so you guys obviously started, way back now. Of course, Bastion seems like a distant memory, I suppose. But I think even before I knew about Supergiant, because I knew about Bastion, right? I knew about the game, but I didn't know specifically like the team behind it and how it was developed. But one thing that, of course, that was always something that I heard about Bastion was the soundtrack, right? That was something that very early on people were talking about. I think between that and the narrator, the whole audio cues in that game were something that people were very tuned into. Even if they maybe at some point didn't like the game for whatever reason, they were always like, "Oh, the soundtrack's killer." And I think it's even like those, there's some of those movies you used to watch back in the 80s where like, the plot or something, you didn't really attune to, but like the soundtrack caught you, right? The music, it was always, something like even recently, films like Drive with Ryan Gosling.
Mm-hmm.
Some people can't attune to it, but like, the soundtrack in that movie is stands alone in one of the best in cinema. So I think audio, of course, plays, one of the biggest parts now because, with a lot of games, the audio cues are almost as important as the visual cues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been probably something that's been great for you to be part of, right, since Bastion's inception.
Yeah, I mean, I think my view on it is maybe a little different in that, I think the way that we approach game development is that sort of every piece is sort of co-equal in importance.
Yes.
If that makes sense. So
yes.
I think it's just part of it for us, I think, is the way that we look at the process as more of a sort of, it's a holistic thing, and every piece is sort of critical to the strength of the entire thing.
Yes.
And so, what we're trying to do is make games that are immersive and really kind of spark your imagination and put you in a place. And I think every component, every discipline has a sort of equal responsibility to do that, if that makes sense.
Yes. I mean, you're probably speaking my exact language, you know, and again, you know, I'll probably miss things or miss say, or, you know, throw things that are maybe a bit off cue, just because, again, like I said before we started recording, that, you know, it's my first time interviewing someone who exists in the audio world. But interesting how you say that, because when we done the game jam, funnily enough, we won multiple awards and done really well. We won like best overall game, best 3D art, all that kind of stuff. But when we talked about the three of us, when they brought us on stream, we did talk about, you know, extensively how we were each a pillar of the game. Like, you know, without my 3D art, without Sean's composing and programming, without Adrian's level design, if any one of those had fallen down at any point, you know, the game wouldn't have been, you know, Tomato Mare wouldn't have been the award winner success it was. It would have been, you know, whatever it was going to be. But yeah, like, I understand what you're saying. Like, you know, everybody has a part. You know, I wasn't even maybe saying like you stood above. It was more just like, I think when I initially heard about Bastion and Supergiant, you know, the soundtrack was one of those things that people were talking about. Specifically, like, that was one of the key things that, you know, they were taking away from that experience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, and the love for the music and the audio in the games has been really awesome and overwhelming. And yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the things that we've tried to do, you know, gameplay wise or whatever, may have been a little more, you know, it's like not for everyone necessarily. You know, or just more specific. We were kind of going out on a limb with some of the things we've tried design wise, I think, and I'm really super glad we did those things. But yeah, I mean, I certainly have heard people be really kind when talking about the music over the years, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me as well, because although, you know, my art is more in visual art, in my early youth, and of course all through my 20s, and I mean still even now, I was a guitar player, you know, I was a singer-songwriter, I played drums, you know, I've messed about with digital stuff as well. So, you know, I have that side of the appreciation, especially, you know, going back to Bastion, talking about maybe the acoustic side of it, big acoustic player, you know, John Waters and that, John Gom, a lot of those guys that are doing interesting stuff with the instrument. And yeah, like really early on, I think that's maybe something that I also maybe appreciate above the visual stuff, is because a good soundtrack can get you different places, especially emotionally.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always funny watching those Final Fantasy playthroughs and Kingdom Hearts when, you know, the music soars up and then, you know, somebody's dying, or, you know, it's like the whole place is crying and the tears are falling, and the music, you know, soars to the crescendo, and like, you're, oh God, and I feel it like so much. But then if the music wasn't there, right, your heart wouldn't ache as much. It wouldn't explode. So
not, no.
It's always a double hitter, I think. You know, you've got the visual cue, you know, you've got the thing you can see, but also the thing you can hear, and you feel it. I think it's different. I'm one of maybe the few people I know that you feel music inside you. It really is like it hits to your soul, because a good soundtrack can do that, as you probably know. Because I've you know, you're working in games specifically, but you'll probably take cues from films or, you know, music composers in general. So yeah, is that something that you will find that makes you a more rounded artist? You try to look outside of the world of video games a lot?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd say my main influence on the music I make for games is just albums that I like, you know, and not not get music made for a specific medium. Actually, is probably like my main the main thing I like to pull from. Right. And I think the main kinds of things I like to kind of incorporate into my own work are like production aesthetics, right? For the most part, you know, like I'll listen to an album and think, gosh, I love this moment where the way the execution of this moment where, you know, the drums and the like kind of distorted bass come in, and it has this incredible feeling of like the way they executed this moment, and not even the musical ideas or anything necessarily, but it's sort of like an arrangement production thing. And then I find that those things I feel pretty okay about trying to sort of reproduce the feeling of that, and it doesn't feel like cheating or copying to me, because it's just really it's just like an aesthetic. It's like trying to paint in a particular style or something. Is sort of how I see it. So you know, there's specific moments and that drum sound on this album is really spectacular, and I want to try to incorporate that into my thing. And and it's always sort of investigating, like, how would I, with my sort of limited setup, recreate this thing that I like on this record, and so on. And that's the stuff that really tickles me mostly. And then, of course, I'm a songwriter at heart, and that's sort of my main background.
Yeah.
And so anytime I'm sort of blown away or impressed by songwriting, I always try to figure out what it is about the way the song moves and the quality of the lyrics and the way the chords change and everything, and sort of what is it that's happening that I like so much, and try to sort of analyze it and kind of maybe reverse engineer if I want to recreate create that feeling in the music that I'm making.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how we talk about, like the different disciplines, but what you're saying is the same language as an artist, visual artist as well, because, you talk about picking from different things. We constantly sit on stuff like ArtStation or any other medium. I mean, your art director, I mean, Jen in general, like, a lot of the artists you have in Supergiant are just inspiring to me also. And I think some of the best people in the industry, this, of course, you work with them. But like, it's interesting to see, when you look at stuff and you're like, oh, how did they paint that tree? What brush are they using? Like, how can I incorporate that in my workflow? It's the same thinking, right? It's the same almost wavelength of like
totally
things. Yeah, like 100%. It's funny actually how you talk about, like we're both artists, right? So the artistic approach in most things is probably the same across multiple disciplines. But now, sometimes you'll get into specifics about drum sounds or reverb, and we'll just talk about contrast or saturation. Or, it's it's the same stuff, but you're just talking
different tools. Yeah, it's just different tools. Yeah.
I mean, like, especially when I look at, Jen's stuff. I mean, Jen is like, I mean, God, like, there's no words really. I mean, I know so many people who sit and look at her stuff every day and they're like, what? And Jesus, man, so talented.
She's incredibly talented, yes.
Really, really. But yeah, with music-wise, like, I feel what you're saying about, incorporating and taking from different cues. And I mean, I think it's more even, sometimes I've found that when you talk production, I talk composer sometimes. So of course, like the cliche, I mean, I'm a Zimmer fanboy, I've loved the guy for a very, very long time and everything he's done. But recently, even looking at guys like Gustavo, the guys who done the soundtrack for Last of Us, the way he developed the music for The Last of Us, of course, there was a great small documentary they done, and they dived into his world, and even finding that moment where, spoilers, his daughter dies, and that was one of the kind of first things he showed Neil in that moment. And you can see when he's watching it, Neil's watching it, but he, Gustavo has his eyes closed. He's trying to listen, just feel the music and feel how that, and it's definitely, I think, those moments, from time to time. And I feel, probably because Hades is one of the games I've played the most out of your collection. And there's definitely those moments, especially when I feel like he's talking to his dad, or there's some moments where he's conversing with gods. There's some real storytelling with the music in the background, as well as the visual stuff obviously that's going on in the writing. Is there something particularly you found production wise that you brought to the table with Hades as opposed to your previous projects?
I think we've all sort of learned a lot on each of our games, and we've done a fair bit of experimentation in sort of every direction on all the games. And I think Pyre, I really learned a lot about interactive music and stem-based music, and using sort of sections, advancing through sections and doing beat markers and all that stuff, which is something that I hadn't really done. I'd done a little bit of the stem-based stuff on Transistor.
Right.
But hadn't, the level of reactivity was ramped up quite a bit on Pyre. So I think I came into Hades knowing knowing sort of what seemed most effective in Pyre that we did with that stuff, and sort of, kind of shaving off some of the extra complicated stuff that had maybe diminishing returns in terms of the granularity of the reactivity of the music. And just tried to find that sweet spot where the music would, it would react to your playthrough in a way with a touch of randomness that would help the longevity of the pieces. 'Cause, it's a game that you can play for 100 or more hours if you want.
Yeah.
And so how does 2.5 hours of music stand up to to 200 hours of playing or whatever, 100 hours of playing.
Of course.
So one of the things I was looking for is ways to increase the perceived variety of music by how we play it, by how we play it back.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other thing was to really try to make it feel scored to your particular run and to move with you as you move through the different chambers and everything. And so, kind of however long it takes you or however quickly you do it, it should always feel like it's sort of, just playing exactly what it should for whatever's happening in your playthrough. So trying to fine tune that reactivity and get it to feel, the moment when you hit the mini boss or the boss, and getting that transition to feel right where it kicks into the rocking part, and everything, and getting that to feel really satisfying and all that stuff. Once we sort of developed the systems for that and figured out what the layout and structure of the game was going to be, that was the sort of hard part that involved, just trying a bunch of stuff and kind of seeing what felt right. And then once we had that template, it was, much easier to sort of go and make all of the pieces of music sort of in that format from there. And then as far as, certainly there are some sort of, a lot of the music is not character themes. It's sort of place. It's like themes that are more for like a place, like Tartarus. There are sort of several Tartarus pieces of music and several Asphodel pieces of music and so on. And some of the pieces, like the main theme and God of the Dead are sort of character or story themes, and then of course On the Coast and In the Blood incorporate another character I don't want to spoil, but are sort of themes for that character and represent that whole thing. So and On the Coast in particular has a number of stems that are sort of implemented a little bit more subtly, but changes, try to enhance the emotion of the different conversations and that you're having with that character. And when you get back from interacting with that character and talk to Hades again, and there's a particular moment where that music's still playing while you're talking to Hades, which doesn't happen a lot. I think you may know what I'm talking about if you've gotten there. But having the music sort of, play the right section and the right stem at the right time to sort of enhance the feeling of that moment and so on. And all that stuff was stuff that I feel like we kind of learned how to do on Pyre, more or less, and then tried to sort of refine the process a little bit on Hades.
So is that something that you are actively involved in where it comes to, because there's so much musicality involved, but then to cue that, I'm assuming that takes a level of programming, understanding, knowledge that you would have to also incorporate with how the audio interacts from gameplay, moment to moment. Are you heavily involved in that programming side, or does that more with the game design team, and then you're kind of giving them cues on when certain things should play or how stems should work out? Or
it's usually I don't script the music, but I will set up all of the parameters in the middleware. So I use Fmod as the middleware to incorporate the audio into the game, and I'll set up the various stems and the parameters that control the stems, and I'll set up all the section markers, and then the parameter that will control like how it advances through the sections, and when it gets to the next downbeat, advance to the next section, and so on.
Yep. And is so that, I was just going to ask quickly, but does that mean that, something we were talking about earlier, of course, does that mean that if you had a programming, also a kind of programming background or knew enough of programming that you could direct that stuff yourself almost?
Yeah. So generally what will happen, usually the way it works is if there is somewhere in script an instance of it happening, I could theoretically go in and copy that instance somewhere else and make it work. But to generate it, I'm not, I haven't advanced to that level of scripting yet. But usually Greg Kasavin will script the music and then send it, if there is a specific way, like for example, On the Coast, the scripting for that took, we iterated on that a lot, where he would try some stuff and kind of tailor it to the conversation, and I'd go and give some notes. And it would change, but the implementation of the other stem stuff and all the section advancement is stuff that we kind of sat down and looked at together in the studio way back when we were before we launched into early access.
In a studio. Yeah.
When we were in a studio together. Yeah. Now we're all at home. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, is that a thing that you found? I mean, I know there was a whole thing of you setting up the sound booth for voice acting and stuff like that. But then, have you found that it's been conducive to your process, or is there another effect you found now that you're all alone in essence? Because I mean, like even within, you had your own space in Supergiant where you would have worked exclusively to your own speed. But how do you feel lockdown has changed that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think certain aspects of the process are harder remotely, and certain aspects are sort of unchanged, or maybe even slightly more streamlined. If we were in a pre-production phase of the project when the pandemic happened, it would have been way harder, in my opinion, to really because a lot of that stuff, a lot of the ideas that happened during pre-production and even early production, is like, hey, you want to go get coffee? Sure. And then you go and you have a walk and talk and you drink some coffee and you're like, you know what I've been thinking about? I just watched this movie and it gave me this, and you just have ideas and you spit back and forth, and I know Greg and I had a lot of those walks and they're all like a bunch of beats in the game that happened, like little moments and stuff that were like, oh, you know what we should do? It'd be so fun if we could pull this off, Yeah. And a lot of it comes out of that. But then at the end of the project, when you're just hunkered down and trying to finish everything, those conversations are not as important to that process. It's more like everybody just needs to finish their work and check it in. And so being able to sort of work head down from home, and honestly, the saving on commute time really helps at the end of the project when every hour counts,
I could imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's interesting, I think, as well for, my partner's found that as well, because she works as a software developer in the main city, Glasgow, not far from where we are. And the train commute usually in the morning's about, half an hour, 40 minutes. But and then the walk to the office. So, but then it's weird now where, that was even an expense at one point, and now that money's getting saved, and the hassle and especially like when I was in LA, I know that some of the traffic I used to get in there, on the 501 or whatever it's called, a lot of the places, it's like you're stuck in some of those for hours. So I mean, it definitely is. It's giving you maybe that time back in the studio, like to be more creative, and especially when you get up in the morning, you're not having to really scamper to think about, I need to get ready and get to the office and stuff. You can just maybe grab a coffee, sit down, and be like, cool, where's my project going today? What am I going to implement?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in essence, you're moving forward now with 1.0, and that's kind of, hit, and you guys are still working on the game. It's I think it's like you said, it's one of these few games now where the game's launched, but then you've still got a road ahead, for the next part. It's one of these things where you will be updating the game regularly, and there's content stuff planned out that it's going to be hitting at every milestone.
I mean, I would just to be clear, we don't necessarily have that as a plan. The thing that
interesting.
The thing that we're focused on right now is making sure the game is stable and that all the features go in that we said would go in, and we're working on cross saves and stuff, and we're trying to get that out, and just making sure that we don't mess up anybody's save file, and really testing everything properly, and then we'll see kind of what's next, or if there are other platforms we need to et cetera, et cetera. So we're a really small team, and so it kind of takes all hands to do a lot of those things, even if they're not even if like some of our designers are helping with QA, and there's all stuff is just like it's kind of all hands, just because the game has been super incredibly well received, and it's amazing, and we've never seen anything like it for any of our games, frankly. But it also creates like we have to have like 24/7 support, because we have like thousands and thousands of people playing all the time, all over the world. So that that's certainly I know for some of the support and engineers has been a trial by fire. It's been a real
It's been hell. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah,
I'm going to see how many times I can mention that throughout the podcast.
Yeah, but
I think it was. I would think what I was originally saying though was more like, I know you're not planning like maybe big content drops, but what I was kind of saying was that you're planning to stay with the game for the longer post-release.
We plan to support it, on all the platforms that it's on and it's going to be on.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, I think it's interesting as well how a lot of the original concepts for how you built games was based off a lot of the old Xbox Live architecture. That was interesting because, of course, when you made the switch to, pun again, to move to Nintendo's platform, that was something, of course, you had to incorporate because you had to, have a whole entire engine change and making sure that was stable, and of course, audio issues with that, and it's always something you notice really early on. If there is something going wrong with your game, you hear the glitchy audio. It's always like, oh God, what's happening?
Yeah,
nothing's queuing, or the voices, the voice stuff's off, or people aren't speaking at the right points, and so that's got to be like a nightmare, like you said, because there's only how big is the team right now?
I think we're like 19 full-time people or something.
Oh, wow, that's 18? A small team for. I mean, for the reach you guys have, like the size of your games, you'd think it was a team of like 100 people or something, but it's only like less than 20. You can really say at this point, 20, and it must be, I suppose, overwhelming. But then again, this isn't the first game you've made, so like you've got an idea, right, of how you work together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think part of the thing that's allowed us to make such a big game is the fact that we've done a bunch of games together now. This is our fourth, and we've increased our efficiency with each project, and the people, we were 12 people on Transistor and Pyre pretty much, and we staffed up in really kind of tactical ways to really maximize our efficiency as a team, I think. And the people we've added have been so incredible and so amazingly talented and done just remarkable work, and really, we couldn't have done Hades the way we did it without the people that we added to the team. So, the sort of the efficiency and experience of the people who've been on the team the whole time, plus this incredible talent and the efficiency and, incredible skill that the new people bring. I mean, it's really the combo of that stuff, I think, really helped us execute what we were trying to do for Hades, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a ton of work. I mean, it's a ton of stuff, but it's not, it's always just, what's the next thing? I mean, for me, at least, it's just like,
you're not like running about the studio with like, like you're putting out fires constantly, you're screaming and, oh my God, what's happening? And you kind of got your head in a swivel. I mean, there probably will be times where, things might jump out of whack, or, you're like, oh God, what's happening? But in general, you're quite like, no, we got this. Like we understand our team's capacity for making games now, and we're not going to push beyond those limits unless we feel we need to. So yeah, it's interesting how I think that everything's came together in like the last couple of months, and especially because I mean it was super interesting as well, right? Because you were pushing 1.0 when you were in lockdown. That was something that was coming thick and fast, when you wanted to stick to that date. You wanted to make sure you had all your ducks in line. And again, like, was that something else that was a challenge within lockdown? Was that something that particular was in the back of your mind when lockdown happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think we realized not too far into lockdown that we were probably still going to be in lockdown when the game came out. Just like, well, this isn't going to go away soon. We started to realize. So, I mean, it was certainly it was an additional problem to solve and an additional thing to look out for. But I think, some aspects of the finaling of the project maybe were a little bit easier when everybody's at home, just everybody having like those extra couple of hours instead of commuting, that I think makes a difference. And everybody, I think that there were sort of pros and cons. I mean, obviously part of, finishing a project and being able to physically be with everybody in the studio on launch day is something that's really awesome, or being able to have a launch party in person, for example, and all that stuff. The sort of celebrations are the things that are the most, the biggest bummer that we couldn't do together. But I think as daunting as that idea is of launching the game in quarantine, we all sort of made peace with it, I think, pretty early during the quarantine process. We're like, all right, well, we're doing this, I guess,
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been interesting to see even the fact that, PS5 and Xbox Series X just dropped, those happened in a lockdown. But then in essence, that's probably a good thing as well because, with lockdown, people are playing a lot more games. They're watching a lot more movies.
Yeah.
So it's funny how now you feel like, I know certain sectors of the entertainment industry, film especially, right?
Yeah.
Has been affected, post-COVID. But it seems like the game industry is thriving more, because of just the demand for it, right?
I can't tell. It's sort of anecdotal, right? It's like I don't have any data to back up that claim myself, but it seems like that's the case, and it certainly I think part of the fact that game production is able to continue basically unhindered without people being in the same space is the sort of advantage we have over sort of films and things that with live with actors and a bunch of crew and I know animation is still happening sort of unabated similarly just because it's a kind of thing where people can do the work from their computer from their house or whatever. But
I mean like even the whole the whole vocal booth situation and stuff like that, I mean that was built out of necessity, right? You had to not only facilitate the booth in your home, but then, build it and get it set up. And, was that a case also that, you were having sessions there where people were coming over to the booth and, you're having to record them in your home? And was that part and parcel of the lockdown process also? Or
so what we did, so before lockdown, we had some actors that would come into the studio, into the office to record their parts. But when lockdown happened, we decided that like it just wasn't worth any sort of risk to have anybody come in anywhere. So we sent all the actors who were coming in, we sent them all sort of microphones and had them do like a setup in their apartment or house or whatever. And I just recorded them that way. So yeah, I mean, it was we kind of YOLO'd that together and figured it out pretty fast. And maybe if I had to do it again, I'd sort of spend a little more time making sure everybody had like a perfect match for the equipment that we used in the office or whatever, just because.
Right.
But it, I'm using like outboard gear and kind of an expensive or, like a nice condenser mic, not anything too fancy, but certainly we can't like buy everybody those. But we could maybe have sent, it's just like it would just be a lot more involved to make a process of like
sending them stuff and then bringing it back.
Sending them stuff, like teaching them how to set it all up specifically, then sending it back. Yeah. Finding a spot, like treating their house somehow, that's all a more elaborate thing than we were prepared to do. So we ended up just sending everybody a USB mics. We sent them all like blue snowballs and, and pop filters. Yeah, because I've got pop filter and a mic stand.
I was going to say the blue is typical. I've got the Yeti, the kind of $100 version, but like they're definitely for the lower end, maybe even mid tier. They're definitely capable mics. They're not cheap and they're not overly expensive. So
no, and I mean Logan recorded all of Pyre with a snowball. And he sounds awesome in that game, and I think it really the only issue was that I had started recording some of the characters with a different setup. That's the only qualm I had about them using snowballs. It was just that it was just going to not sound the same as some of the other stuff they recorded. So I had to do some kind of fanciness in post-production to try to match it a little better.
Right.
If that makes sense. But
yeah.
But that was my only worry. I mean, I'm totally cool with sending everybody snowballs or whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, whatever needs. I mean, like it's just the adaptation of the conditions we live in now, right, and having to do things. I mean, it's funny how I think a lot of the industry, when lockdown happened, for a lot of the guys I knew who were freelancers or worked at outsourcing studios, versus working in a studio, a lot of those guys were like, "Well, this is just another day for me. This is just." I've been like this for so long. This is normal to me. Yeah. So Yeah, like the people who were obviously, out and about all the time or had very active lives or jobs, they were the people that were the hardest hit, right? Was the
Yeah,
people who
absolutely.
had to make the biggest adjustments. So
Yeah.
So then, I suppose looking back, when you look at, I guess we'll say your legacy, although you're very far off from thinking about, the end times, but also, because you've came a long way since Bastion, and even though it's only maybe been not as many years, I think it maybe feels like that sometimes when you've worked in these projects for so long.
Yeah.
But if you were looking back now, because we tend to do that even with concept artists, right? When we have them on the show, we try to say like, look, there's students out there who maybe want to fill your shoes one day, or who want to enter the world you're in. What's the kind of things you think now, having had this career that you've had, you would look back and think, I wish I had done or thought of that, or took that road. No regrets, obviously, but maybe things that you would have pointed out to other people who were trying to follow.
I think my take on that stuff is what are some of the things that have really helped me when I learned them, is sort of my way I approach that question. Because for me, it's like, I'm happy with where things have led, and I'm happy with the road to get here.
Yeah, of course.
So I think for me, it's more, what are some of the things that were really helpful to me and that I've used, and leaned heavily on, and I think for me, music production and audio production and having a really like a strong audio engineering understanding and background has been super, super helpful for me.
Yep.
Because with that, it's sort of allowed me to experiment and figure out how to do things that I didn't know how to do necessarily, but I had the tools to do them, because I understood, just the audio engineering and production and how to try to make stuff sound good.
Yep.
And I had the tools to sort of experiment and figure that out. Mm-hmm. So I think I would say like getting really comfortable with a DAW, getting some audio production, music production, audio engineering chops would be really useful to somebody trying to get in, to just about any aspect of audio, game audio.
Yeah.
I think having an understanding of middleware is something that I'm still like, I only really developed like a couple of projects in,
Right.
Transistor was the first, like on Bastion, we use this sort of free tool that doesn't exist anymore, that wasn't very capable, and I didn't understand how it worked, and the engineers just had to kind of help me. And I sort of had a basic understanding of like, okay, you set up a queue and you can instance limit it and you can put a little pitch variance on it and you can do this other stuff, but it was really basic. And then we switched to Fmod for Transistor, and then in the middle of that project switched to the new Fmod, which is kind of looks like a DAW. It's called Fmod Studio. Right. And that is when I really started to try to explore the capabilities of the DAW and ways to explore sort of creative ways of implementing audio, because I had the tools to do it at that point. And it's one of those things where, it's a software that you can download and experiment with for free. You only have to pay money, I think, if you're going to ship a game with it. Right. So, I would recommend getting familiar with some type of middleware, whether it's Wise or, even in Unity, they have some integration tools, or Fmod, just kind of experimenting with that and just playing with tools and the tools that are there and seeing how you can use them to execute on ideas that you might have. Right. So I mean,
yeah. I mean, like, is that also do you feel like, I know you in particular play a range of musical instruments. Do you feel like that musicality is also key to being creative in your field?
I think for me it is. I mean, I know there are some people who compose music for games and don't intend to be the performers of any of that music ultimately, or are just programming MIDI, or are just writing for people to, or writing scores for people to perform. So there are a bunch of ways to do it. I mean, I know for me, my ability to play stuff has been critical because I'm the only performer on most of these songs, most of this music in the games. I mean, with a couple exceptions in Hades, and then of course Ashley Barrett, who lends her vocals to a lot of the tunes.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's just me, and a lot of what I am doing is dependent upon my ability to either play it or find some sort of equivalent sample or loop or something that can execute the idea that I have. But that's been my approach from the beginning, actually, is, what can I execute by myself in my studio, like in my little project studio that I have. And that was, that's been a question on every project, and the answer has changed a little bit. Like I feel more capable of doing more things now because of the tools or because of my experience or because of whatever, than I did when I started on Bastion. But, my production, my sort of, I have 10 more years of production experience, et cetera, et cetera. But, but really the answer, it's always, the music is always partially, at least, dictated by what can I pull off, personally.
Right.
And I'm trying to always expand my comfort zone as much as I can. So there's a bit of trying to push myself outside of what I know I can execute at the outset of a project.
Yeah, of course.
But
well, I mean, it's the same with most artistic integrities. You always want to be. Remember David Bowie in an interview years and years ago always said that you want to be walking out and treading water so that your feet are just touching the ground, and he always feels like that's where you do your best work. Where you're just a little bit uncomfortable. So I think, the guy, for me, was a visionary. He was so far ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
I remember even watching an interview years ago where, he was talking about how the internet would influence people.
Absolutely.
And,
it was like in 1997 or something, 99.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, and he was like exactly predicted what happened with the internet. And the guy.
How we would consume media and everything.
Yeah.
And
it's great. And the interviewer was just like, but isn't it just like mail? And he's like, no, it's not like mail. It's not like a library.
Of course, but then when you're so involved in the world, and I think you have a really unique perspective and artistic take on how you look at the world, you can see 2 or 3 years ahead, right? You can see how the world's maybe going to change or swerve or move. Yeah. And I think it's the human condition and also the artistic condition where you almost know too much, right? And then you can see the world for what it is. And you have to almost recoil into that to do work, but then come back out of it and try and save yourself, because I think especially lockdown has been one of these things where crisis mode has been on our brains for so long, and we're kind of not built to be in crisis mode for so long, and mental health is suffering, and it was funny again looking back on Danny's documentary with No Clip and talking about when he talked to Amir and Greg, and he was like, how is everybody? And even Greg was honestly like, I couldn't honestly tell you. Because most people are saying like, we're fine and stuff, but I'm not with them day to day, so I don't know how they're dealing with what's going on, and it's got to be challenging, obviously, because we're not used to it. But it was almost like when Developing Hell was the title that he chose for it, honestly, it was clever because, of what the game was involved in. But then, of course, COVID hits and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you couldn't have picked a better title, really, looking back on it. Even the fact that, I was one of Danny's backers on the Summer Jam he done, with the lanyards. I bought one of those really early on. I'm desperate to get Danny on the podcast and talk to him because he's just such an awesome dude. But I remember doing the video for that. It was like the backdrop when the fires were happening. And I was like, oh my God, like, it's just like, I mean, somebody done this animation really early on. I think it was like there's like stupid toon things where it's like they've drawn like 2 lines to animate it, but it's basically like how 2020 goes. And it's just like rockets everywhere and people flying across the globe and viruses and explosions and fire. And I was like, oh my God, it's like the meme where the little dog's like, this is fine, everything's on fire behind him. Oh, it's a fun time to be an artist, in fact, and it's funny as well because people talked about really early on where, because people were inside, a lot of guys were saying, you really have to have an appreciation for artists because the movies you're watching, the games you're playing, the music you're listening to, while you're in times of isolation, those are things that are produced by artists, and you have to understand that that's, without that, where would we be, especially even just looking at television with Netflix and stuff, like how people who would have coped without, you know, the on-demand stuff is beyond me, you know. So it's crazy where we look at the world now and what it's came to, but you know, you just keep going, you just keep pushing, and of course now, you know, you guys are still, you know, pushing away at the game and hoping for the best. But you guys, of course, I take it you don't feel like you're going to be back in the office anytime soon, right? That's still like a ways off, like next year sometime.
I mean, we are going to be overly cautious for sure going back. I mean, we just, for us, there's just, unless it's totally safe, there's no reason to go back. Basically, right. and maybe there is for one or two individuals or something, and that would be fine.
Right.
If one person was in the office by themselves, it would be fine. But basically, I just think resuming our regular office life is just, there's no reason to do it until it's totally safe. Just because the risk is too high, and everybody is too important, you know, to the process, and we care about all the health of everybody here. So it's just any amount of risk is too much for us, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to put people's lives at risk just to get, you know, at the end of the day, it's just a game. You know, saying that with all the love I have for Supergiant and Hades, but then a video game cannot replace people's lives. It is completely different. And you know, I think it's and I think the way I've always looked at Supergiant for even most indie studios, but particularly you guys, is that Amir and Greg have always tried to look at, you know, maybe super early on with Bastion and stuff, because it was your first proving ground. A lot of you guys weren't sleeping, or maybe doing some extra hours because, you know, it was your livelihoods. But now I feel like they're trying to more than ever say, like, look, if you want to stay at home and don't come into the office, it's fine. Or, you know, if you need to take a day, totally fine. I think overwork is definitely the death of a lot of people in this industry. I feel like, you know, I mean, recently, you know, not to cast a dark cloud over the podcast, but I just watched Danny's documentary on Astroneer. Mm-hmm. Paul, of course, I knew his work really early on, and when he passed, that was a huge loss to the whole industry, because I was very involved in concept art early on, and I knew his name and what he was doing, and you know, the cause of death I don't think ever came out, but I know those guys were, of course, pushing themselves because, you know, they were trying to make something incredible. And I feel now more than ever like we really need to take people's health more in consideration with this industry.
For sure.
Like it's definitely a big thing. So I mean, but then so moving forward with the team, I mean, you obviously can't talk about what's next and stuff like that. That's, you know, that's the typical thing with a lot of these things. You know, you get a lot of big artists, and then you're always you can't really look forward a lot of the times because you know, a lot of that stuff is so unknown and stuff. But looking back, I mean, is there anything you think that you might have done differently, or something that you feel like there was a road you didn't travel down that you maybe wanted to try at one point, even outside of audio, like just with the team in general? Do you feel like there's anything you've looked back on over these years of making games and thought that there was something else you could have maybe tried?
Honestly, you know, I don't really, it's funny because I don't really see stuff that way generally. Like when I look back at the efforts I've put forward, you know, for the game audio for these games, I've done my very best at the time, every time. Yeah. You know, and kind of given it my all. To the full capacity of what I am capable of at that moment in time. And it's like, I think the decisions that I made, you know, I don't know that I'd go back and change them retroactively just because it sort of wouldn't be representative of me at that time anymore. And the work that I did. So, I have kind of like an attitude of, you know, once it's out there, it's not mine anymore, kind of. Right. You know, so I don't really have the right to go back and change anything. You know, I don't want to Star Wars Special Edition. You know, of course. add a meet Jabba the Hutt or whatever. You know, to
It's almost like I think with most artists, you get to that point where you're done, but then you feel like you're never done. Right. Yeah. There's always something you can change, something you can master, something you can re-record. Yeah. But then I think the good thing about deadlines in this industry is eventually you have to be like, it's done. It's out of my hands. It's now in the hands of the players. They're the guys that are going to see if this game lives or dies.
Yeah.
And I think it was interesting as well when Greg was talking about, like the early access reviews were super positive, right? And then even all the way through, that they stayed positive. They didn't tank. They didn't, fall through. So, which is of course, like he says, even then, like it's super rare, right? You don't see that with early access stuff or things that take a while to come out. It's usually the complete opposite. So, it's always funny when I use the word lucky, because I don't think it's luck, right? It's not that like, the dice have rolled and they've managed to land on a 7. It's not like, you're throwing dice and everything is planned, everything is purposefully placed there. So it is the hard work and the dedication for the team that's got you to this point. And I don't think you could have looked at it any other way. Like you say, you couldn't really go back and change anything because at the time you'd made the decision.
Yeah.
And that's what you had to live with. So I think it's very interesting to see now, looking back at all the games you've made. I mean, we've even maybe only focused on maybe 2 of the games you've made, really, when we talked about different soundtracks and stuff. Yeah. Like ideally the first game you made, the latest game you shipped. Yeah. But then, of course, like you say, through Pyre, through Transistor, there was also things you were doing and deciding that changed the outcome of that game and made it what it was. So I think it's almost like you can't live with those regrets thinking forever that you could have done something differently, because it would haunt you forever. Yeah. And you've got to just make your peace with putting something out into the world and hoping people like it, right?
For sure. And I mean, to address the thing about luck, a little bit. I mean, for me, I certainly see, the game itself is what we make of it and the sum of the work of the individuals involved. But
yeah.
The response is, often, we feel like it's a thing that's just kind of, there's a lot of factors involved in whether or not it's the right game for this moment in time, and that people, and then it manages to rise above the noise of this really crowded industry and all this other stuff. So, we certainly, I certainly believe that there's an element of the stars aligning whenever that goes right. So I think that's sort of what Greg means when he's saying talking about luck, and that's what at least that's sort of how I understand it. It's just there's a lot of stuff that has to line up just right for a game to be a big success and for people to respond particularly well to something and it's certainly we try not to take any of that stuff for granted. It's not just a matter of us doing our thing. It's also a matter of the sort of world, and at large and people wanting that thing at a particular moment in time and all that stuff. So we tend to not take any of that stuff for granted, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's one of those things where even I experienced it on a very amateur, very small scale when we pushed out that game in 4 days, and we tried to cross the T's and dot the I's and look at every other angle about how people would interact with it and how they would look at the audio. But then the biggest response we got was when we put it out into the world and people were then reviewing it and leaving the great comments, and it was getting voted up and up and up, and it was exploding. We didn't expect it, but then we knew really early on when we finished it that we had something special. And like you said, the pillars aligned and everybody who was involved done their part. And then something magical happened that it's almost like the perfect storm, right? You can't plan for it. But then when enough good elements come together, the lightning strike happens and there's the effect, there's the smouldering amber that's left in the world that people look at. So yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, like I think that's a great place to leave it, Darren. I think we've covered a lot. I think with a lot of these interviews, the hour flies in, right? It's just that you talk about so many different aspects of your career and things you've done, and But I think we might try even at one point to get you back on, or of course, if you can recommend people you also think would be great, that would be awesome. Yeah. And once again, just to thank you for coming on and giving up your time. I know how you guys are probably knee deep in it at the moment, trying to get stuff finished or polished at this point. So every minute counts, but it's always great to have. And again, because you're you are the first on Digital Artcast, the first audio director that we've had on, for a game. And I think it's, although I think at points I thought it was going to be difficult for me to converse because, the disciplines inherently, I think, were different. We have found a common ground.
Yeah, sure.
So have you enjoyed it? Have you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a nice.
No, of course.
Nice. It's always, it's nice to talk about this stuff after
of course.
Toiling away silently for a minute. It's always,
I think it's just it's the development bubble, right? Because you always feel like you're doing great stuff, but then you're just not sure because you're only hearing it, and the world doesn't get to experience it yet. But then, the feedback loop is the thing that's most interesting. But yeah, I came onto this as a fan as well of your work and of the team's work. So, your game it's always great to hear that people enjoy what you do. It does give you that motivation to push forward and keep doing what you're doing. So, I think it's great to check in once again now and again every day with the fans and with people that want to talk about the game, because it does give you a checkpoint to think about where you are right now and where you're going. So yeah, it's been great. If you guys have stuck about to the end, I'll leave Darren's socials down below. You can probably get in touch with him if you have any questions or want any feedback. I'm sure he's open to that, speaking to people, as long as you guys are polite, of course, as always, courteous, and make sure you're being a decent human being. That's always the key. But yeah, we're going to try and get more people on of Darren's ilk and try and expand our reach and knowledge pool. I think some of the greatest growths we have in this industry as not only artists but human beings come from when we reach outside of our own circles. So I think it will be great to get different people on. If you're listening to us on any podcast service, we have a kind of main body of work on YouTube where we upload videos as well. But yeah, you can find us on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, all the usual stuff. And yeah, nearly at 3k followers. So yeah, looking good. We also have a Discord if you guys want to get involved and want any feedback and want to speak to other students. I think we have about 150 people on there just now, and some great guys who display and show art off and talk about different tools and mindsets and workflows. So check it out, guys. Make sure you hit us up. And then just finally, just again, my thanks to Darren for coming on, for you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Okay, bye guys.
Deal some death.